Wow, I can't believe we're all the way to module number 6. Well, I'm excited for this today. It's going to be a pretty meaty topic, and I've got a personal fun story that relates to the topic we're talking about today. So we're going to be working on how to get your customers to love you and not just like you. Let's go ahead and start diving into this today. So what are we going to cover? Well, first of all, we're going to talk about surveying your customers. Do your customers really know who you are and what they think of you? Number 2, we're going to talk about developing consistency before brilliance. We're going to then talk about getting your team to love your customers and not just like them. And finally, we're going to talk about how are we going to develop ongoing and effective communications with your customers. So let's go ahead and dive into this today. To review from our last session, let's talk about what we covered. Well, we talked about your time targets and where you should be using your time. Are you spending enough time in the not urgent but important, or are you in those outer rings wasting a lot of very potential and valuable time? I want you to always remember this little phrase. You can always make more money, but you can't make more time. So time is such a critical aspect in your business. How to put together a basic yet effective time plan, making sure that you're doing the big rocks, those most important things first and foremost. We talked about developing your own self-monitoring time management system. And finally, I hope you've been able to download the super cool time tracking system and been able to have a chance to play with it. And even if you choose not to use that, develop something yourself, whatever works best for you. So let's get started and let's talk about surveying your customers. So first, let's look at what they are saying about you in social media. You see, a lot of times your customers are already talking about you, you just don't even know about it. So let's talk about what are some of the primary sites that they might be talking about you on. Well, first of all, Facebook. Are there any things floating around there that might be either good, bad, or indifferent? What about Twitter? Yeah, there's a lot of people on Twitter, and sure, what's going on? Yelp. Yelp is one of the primary review sites out there, and if you are not on Yelp, you need to be on Yelp. If for only one reason, that is to check out what your customers or potential customers might be saying about you. Urban Spoon. This is one of the biggest and best restaurant review sites. And you get a lot of customers who will actually type out a review right inside your restaurant. And if you don't know what they typed, either good, bad, or indifferent, how can you react to them? And then any other survey site that lets your customers give feedback. Google. Matter of fact, Google has a lot of reviews out there. And if you aren't monitoring that, then how will you know what your customers are telling you? So the second thing we need to do is develop and send out a survey. So how do we go about doing that? Well, first of all, we need to look at all the steps in the process of how your customers interact with your business. So let's start off with maybe your website. Is that the first place they meet you? Then, or it could be an initial call to your business. And from there, the welcome at the front door. Service obtained by your employees, the quality of your product or service, cleanliness of your facilities, etc. What are all of those steps in the process of the customer doing business with you? And then break it down into individual questions. So it could be question number 1 could be on, what did you think of our website? Or question number 2 could be related to how were the phones were answered? And number 3 could be the initial greeting at the door. So start taking those critical steps that happen in the life cycle of that customer from the time they first get introduced to you all the way through that final either walking out the door or they open up the package. Break it down into those individual questions. And then give each question a rating scale of either 1 to 5 or 1 to 10. See, I've seen too many surveys that basically ask very vague questions. So that basically is, did you like our service today? Well, it's a yes or a no, or tell us a little bit more about what you thought of our service. Well, that doesn't give us any perspective on how to rate your business. You see, one of the things that we want to do is we want to quantify our results. When we can peg a number value on a questionnaire, then we can create results that get measured. One of my favorite phrases of all time in business is what gets measured gets done. And what gets measured gets better. If you can start putting a quantifiable number in terms of your customer satisfaction, now you have the ability to take action and then measure it again and compare it to the previous results. When you ask vague questions, you're going to get vague answers and you have nothing concrete to work on. So here's one of my favorite questions that we like to ask in surveying your customers. You need to make sure that you include this final question, which will give you what we call your Net Promoter Score. Your Net Promoter Score is one of the most important scores that you can have with your customers. They tell you at the deepest core what they think about you. So what is that question, you may ask, if you don't know what a Net Promoter Score is? Well, it's simply this. How likely are you to recommend our business to your family and friends? You see, they can give you all sorts of either kudos or not so kudos on a survey. But the real test, where the rubber meets the road, is will they recommend you to the people they trust the most? If they give you 10s and 9s on that, you're doing good. If they give you 5s and 6s on that, watch out. You have a problem no matter how high other scores may be. So one of the things I'd like to take a look at is how do we execute a good survey? I would recommend that you use an electronic survey method instead of a traditional paper method. Now, why is that? What I have found is you'll typically get a much higher rate of response using an electronic system, because think about it. When you get a survey in the mail, you open up the envelope, you have to get a pen or pencil, you have to write the answers down, you then have to stuff it into the into the postage paid address, you have to walk it to a mailbox and drop it off, and that's a lot of effort. You actually might break a sweat by doing that. Okay, I know I'm being facetious, but think about it. In today's modern electronic culture, how easy is it to take a mouse or even take your finger if it's on a smartphone and you just push a button to do that? It makes it so much easier. You're going to get a much higher response rate. And also it does all the calculations for you, so you don't have to sit there, go through each individual survey, add them all up, and create a result from that. And it's also much cheaper than the traditional method of stuffing, stamping, mailing, and hoping for the best. I can tell you right now, it is a fraction. For some of these surveys, if you do less than 100, you can get it for free. That's pretty cool. So where are some suggested electronic solutions that you might want to consider utilizing for surveying your customers? Well, one of my favorite and one of the probably best known ones is SurveyMonkey. Again, surveymonkey.com. Its user face is easy. You can do up to the first 100. Very powerful. Another one is Google Surveys. Now this is obviously if you're a big user of, say, Google Pages or any sort of other Google processes, this might actually integrate very well with all of your other things that you use, like a Gmail account or Google Docs or whatever. The third option that I have found actually is also very elegant and very nice is QuestionPro. QuestionPro.com. Again, it's very simple to use. It's something that is not overly complex. And although I have not used it extensively, it's something that you might want to check out. So, the next concept here is we need to develop consistency before brilliance. So let's talk about the Cindy story, and you guys are going to laugh out of this at my expense, okay? So I'm 16 years old, and I grew up on skis. I absolutely love skiing, and one of my favorite things is to go down a black diamond run, and especially with lots of moguls. Well, on this particular day, I'm at the top of this black diamond run, and probably right about where my pointer is that I see Cindy. Cindy is my high school crush. And I recognize her jacket and her skis from real far off. And I say to myself, watch me. I'm going to go skiing right past her. I'm going to dazzle her with my brilliance. And she is going to just like, wow. So sure enough, I go ahead and I start hitting those moguls, roaring right down there. Absolutely perfect rhythm. And right before I get to her, sure enough, I take a spill. I lose both skis and I go tumbling right past her. And she skis up to me thinking I'm some poor schmuck that she needs to check on. She goes, "Oh, hi, Kevin, it's you. Are you all right?" And I look up at her and going, "I'm fine." So what is the meaning of this story? What does it mean to business? Well, what it means is that you need to be consistent before you're brilliant. You see, I tried to be brilliant, with Cindy, and before I can actually get to the point of that major impact point, I completely messed up. You see, if you're brilliant one day and lousy the next, what does the customer remember? That's right, lousy. You're probably like me trying to ski, impressing Sydney, absolutely hitting the marks until you make a major mistake and you absolutely trash everything. And your customer a lot of times is going to remember that lousiness. So one of the things you have to focus in on is what are you going to do to be consistent? Because remember this, your customers want consistency. Think about this. Does McDonald's make the best hamburger in the world? Well, no, they don't. Do you care? No, not really. You care that the same hamburger you get in your hometown is the same hamburger in New York City, is the same hamburger in Singapore, is the same hamburger in Berlin. That's what's important. So make sure that you're consistent every single day before you try to achieve brilliance. So now, how are we going to work at getting your team to love your customers? Well, the first thing we need to know is does your team understand how much each customer is worth to the business? I will bet you a lot of them have no idea what value that a customer has to the business. So let's take a look at an example here. Let's say that a customer spends an average of $500 a year with you, and you have a 50% gross margin. That is $250 in profits a year from that customer. Modest amount, but let's expand that to the next level. Let's say that if your customer stays with your business for 20 years, that would be $5,000 in lifetime value to the business. Okay, now we're starting to cook with a little bit of gas, but let's take it to the whole next level. And if that customer refers an average of just one customer every 2 years, every 24 months, they just refer one customer to you, and that customer spends the same amount as the customer that referred them, that would be 10 customers at $5,000 in profit. That's a $50,000 lifetime value. Do your team members actually realize when they absolutely trash that relationship with the client or they fail to deliver on their services, how much money they are potentially losing by doing that? It's amazing when you and your team are aware of the lifetime of value of a customer, how important they are and how important it is to deliver consistently every single time. So now we need to talk about developing basic systems so that we can get that consistency in place with your customers. So the first thing is, do you know what are your moments of truth with a customer? In other words, like I talked about earlier in the survey, what are all the major steps that a customer takes in the relationship with you? that basically can either make or break a relationship. So for example, their first contact on the phone, first impression when they walk into your business, or when they go to your website for the first time. All of these things have a major impact on a customer. What sort of impact is that having on them in doing business with you and doing future business with you? So one of the things we need to work on is developing some basic scripts that your team members use with customers. Now, we are not talking about artificial, welcome to ABC Company, how can I help you? No, we are not talking about artificial scripting. What we are talking about is a systematic way that customers are greeted, customers are dealt with, customers are helped, so that the customer knows what to expect from your team. They're not going to come in and get one thing one day and another thing another day. That is jarring for the customer. So you got to work on that. And one of the things I've got for you today in the bonus download section is a thing called Instant Scripts and some sample scripts. These are going to help you start developing some very basic scripting processes that you can use with your employees. So what's the script for when you answer the phone? What's the script when you do an outbound call? What's the script when that person comes in the door? What's a process or a script when you're having to deal with a return, or whatever that is? So let's get some consistency utilizing scripts. So start utilizing a customer relationship management system, or what we call a CRM. So many of you know what a CRM is, but for those who do not know what a customer relationship management system is, it's basically a software solution that you take all of your customers' information, name, address, phone number, buying habits, products they choose, things that they like, any sort of data that you can gather on a customer, and you put it into a systematic, centralized database so that you can reach out and touch them and know exactly what they buy, what they bought, what their patterns are, and basically centralizing that information so that you can use it in the future. It's one of those powerful things that you can do. Now, what are some typical customer relationship management systems out there? There's lots of them out there, but I'm going to focus in on the simplest and most effective ones. There's a lot of fancy ones out here, but these are three that I have used, and I can absolutely tell you they work and work well. The first one is Softfront.com. Softfront is something that we use at Action Coach. It's very simple and yet very effective. It doesn't have a lot of bells and whistles on it, but sometimes simple is sophisticated. The second one is Zoho. Zoho actually has a free, and I like the word free, very basic CRM system that you can put in some very basic information and manipulate the database. Obviously, if you need more, you have to pay for it, but I like that you can start off at zero. The third one is what we call Ace of Sales. Ace of Sales is a very, very simple system to use, but what I love about it is it produces some of the nicest looking emails that you can send out to your customers. So those are three CRM systems that would absolutely have you check out and see if that's something that would work for you. So now let's talk about how we're going to do some ongoing communication with your customers. Now, one of the things is that one of the concept of what we call relationships. Basically, on a balancing scale here, the more you put into a relationship can overcome the negative that happens. This happens a lot in marriage, because guess what? Sometimes you have to invest into people through positive actions because you're going to have withdrawals. Deposits have to be more than the withdrawals that you have in a relationship. So for example, let's say that in your life You put deposits into your marriage relationship with your spouse, and let's say something negative happens. Well, you've got a lot of deposits in essence stored up. And so a negative thing isn't going to destroy the relationship initially. It's the same way in business. How many deposits are you putting into your customer so that when negative things happen, let's say an order gets misplaced, you have a service failure or something, that it's not the end of the world. If you don't have that ongoing communication with your customers and they don't know who you are, it just takes one negative experience for them to walk away because you haven't put any deposits into them. So here's the thing, is it doesn't have to be fancy. We're not talking about some elegant, brilliant newsletter. Now, I have had clients over the years that have used brilliant newsletters, and they worked effectively. Yes, they were costly, but they did work well. But in your case, it doesn't necessarily have to be fancy. It could be a coupon or a note of thanks in your invoice envelope. How many of you have the old style, you print off the invoice and mail it out to them? If it's just the invoice, why can't you put something else in there? You're already spending the money on the stamp. It costs almost nothing for the paper and ink. Why not do something? Well, what about a birthday card for your customer? Think about that. And one of the things a great CRM system has is that it can help you store that information of when their birthday is, and so it'll pop up and remind you to send a birthday card. Tips, hints, or ideas of how to use your product or service better. What if you were sending them ongoing messages of how they could use your product or service far more effectively than perhaps they're doing now? Do you think that would reinforce the relationship with them? I believe it certainly would. Newsletters I talked about earlier. A lot of email newsletters can be very effective. Now, again, they cost a lot less than the physical newsletter. They may not get as read as much, but maybe in your case, if you're on a really tight budget, you might want to start off with an electronic newsletter. So, biggest rookie mistake that I see in this area is basically assuming you know what your customers think of you without actually asking them. I had a client one time who was really suffering in their business, and I asked him to survey their customers, and he goes, "Oh, I know what my problem is. I don't need to survey your customers." I said, "Well, wait a minute. You may think you know, but have they concurred?" And so I got him to do the survey, and he came back a week later and said, "Oh my gosh, Kevin, what I thought was my problem is not what the customers told me." He says, "I was about ready to spend a lot of money and a lot of time on a solution that would probably have made things even worse had I not surveyed my customers." So don't assume that you know what those customers are thinking. Get them to tell you. So let's wrap this up today. First of all, you need to find out what your customers are saying about you. Get the survey out. Use some of those electronic suggestions that I mentioned. Number two, let's survey those customers to see what's on their minds. Get consistency first and foremost before you try to bedazzle your customers. Don't, tumble down and fall down right in front of Cindy. Okay? And get some basic customer service systems in place. And finally, communicate with your customers beyond just the sale. What are you going to do? Sometimes even just picking up the phone and saying thank you for your purchase means a whole heck of a lot to that customer. So in our next module, what we're going to do is, if you don't know where you're going, all roads will take you there. We're going to talk about developing your business DNA. One of the things we're going to cover is getting out of the survival mindset and start planning for the future. Hopefully we've stopped the bleeding enough right now with stuff that I've had you implement in your business. Now we start needing to get out of the survival mindset. Start looking into the future. What does your future look like? Do you have a vision, and how do you create one? What is the path to achieve that future? Your mission. Okay? How will you get your team on board? Getting that culture drilled down into the depths of your business. So now it's time to get into action. Let's take the concepts that we talked about today, use some of the tools I've provided you, and let's start making it happen. And I look forward to seeing you on the next module.